It's interesting. As men, I find that when we go through breakups, whether we want to break up with someone or whether they break up with us, we tend to experience at some point, whether immediately after or down the track, this feeling of missing our ex and mostly missing what they represented in our lives. And it's interesting because when I was younger, I noticed this super strong. If I was broken up with, which I was for the majority of the time when I broke up with anyone when I was younger, it was shattering. It would literally shatter my ego to pieces. I would feel like I wasn't good enough. I'd feel more insecure than I was before. And it honestly just plagued on my sense of self-worth and identity. The interesting thing is, as I got older, as I went through my personal development journey, I went all in on my fitness, built the business, all the things, is that, when I went through my recent breakup, even though I wanted the breakup and I didn't want to be with the person and I had built my foundations of self-worth, I still had those earlier weeks of missing that person and thinking in my head that I wanted to get back with them, when in reality, what I missed was what they represented in my life. But here's the interesting thing. This time around, it was the first long-term relationship I'd had in my entire adult life, was that I noticed how much quicker I got over the relationship and how much more quickly everything kind of went back to normal and reached equilibrium again. When I was younger, I remember the first probably 2 times that I was broken up with, it plagued me for like a year at minimum. And I remember there was one girl, in fact, who I was super enamored with, who literally for years, I would keep coming back to in my mind and would never be able to fully let go of. Whereas this time around, obviously much older, having developed myself, I was able to move on much faster, not with any form of like negative feeling towards that person. I still think they're an amazing person, but just having the security in myself and who I am. And I'll explain a bit more in a second as to the process that I went through to go through this and to really move past it in a healthy manner, because there are strategies you can apply. But I was able to move on from the relationship without any form of lack or sense of lack within myself. And I was just able to move on happily and comfortably with my life. Now, essentially, this is you right now if you are someone who's clicked on this video because you're going through heartbreak, or you're going through a breakup, or you miss your ex. And essentially, the reason that you miss your ex, let's say that this is her, is because who she is a part of your, like, who she is to you and the relationship that you shared together is a part of your identity. Let's say that this is your entire identity. And essentially, you've tied too much of your identity to that relationship. You've identified with the relationship and what it represents in your life. Now, of course, when that is shattered, you're going to literally experience ego death. You're going to experience the death of a part of your identity, which is always going to be difficult. Now, the reason that this becomes amplified in our lives is because of the perception that we hold towards the relationship. How many times, I can tell you an infinite number of times in my life where I've broken up with someone and all I've thought about were the positives. For example, when I broke up with my recent girlfriend, although that relationship brought me, in my opinion, it was an equal amount of pain and pleasure, like all things in life, but I remember the cost that it was incurring on my life, and the constant thoughts I was having about that cost made me in almost every moment feel resentful because I felt like it was taking away from my life in some way. Of course, this hindered the relationship and ate away at it and chewed away at it over time. But essentially, once we broke up, in those first weeks, or like the first 2 weeks or so, I remember only being able to think about the positive times and thinking about all the good it brought me, the fact that I had connections, someone to live with, all the other things that come with a relationship. And all I could think about in my head was the fact that I had lost those upsides and those features, those benefits, those moments of pleasure, all the good things. So essentially, I was conscious of the positives and I was unconscious of the negatives. So I could only think about the good and I couldn't even see the negative stuff. All the things that I'd been reminiscing, or not reminiscing, but all the things that I had been sitting with over the course of the relationship, all the negatives that I was experiencing and that were plaguing me, I forgot about them, just poof, within those first 2 weeks. And so the first step is to identify the balancing forces in play. Newton's third law: for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every upside, there is an equal and opposite. For every upside or positive, there's an equal and opposite negative or downside. And the inverse of that is also true. So what you have to do is you actually have to start looking for the downsides you're unconscious to. Because think about it like this. At that point in your relationship, when you break up with someone, you might have some things that you see about the person that you don't like and that you're resentful about. But the truth is that if you're feeling like you miss them, you have all these reasons that you think they were an amazing person, they brought you so much good in your life, and you miss all these things. And it's because of this skew that you're experiencing this feeling of loss. Like imagine it like a scale like this. We'll give it a little fulcrum. So imagine that right now, you're seeing the relationship, you're only seeing that one downside, but you're seeing, sorry, that's meant to be a negative. You're seeing all of these positives and all of these things that you've lost and missed, and it's pulling the scale of your perception down. This is why you miss the person so deeply. It's because you are infatuated with them. You're putting your perception of them up on a pedestal, and as a result, you're lowering yourself in relation to it. You're depressing your perspective of your reality without her than you are in comparison to the reality with her, essentially. So what you have to do is literally balance out this scale. You have to try and find all the equal and opposite downsides. Think about all the things that relationship was actually taking from you and costing you. Think about the ways that you were worse off. You literally have to balance this scale, and you have to list these down, ideally on paper or in a Google Doc or Notion or whatever, and balance them out. Because as soon as you can find an equal number of ways that the relationship was hurting you, hindering you, costing you, holding you back, and maybe even the negative character traits they had that you weren't, really looking for in a long-term partner, list those all down. As soon as you can get them all down in equal proportion to the upsides, you'll neutralize the perspective. That's the first step. But the second step is to identify, funny I use that word, you have to identify the pillars of your, not even identify, you have to, if you don't have any pillars of your identity, create new pillars to your identity. You have to develop yourself and your perception of yourself. Because if in this scenario, your identity is built fully on this relationship with this girl, as soon as that relationship's gone, you will crumble into nothingness, because all of the foundation from which the building of yourself is standing on has just crumbled. So you have to start building these new pillars. The core elements that I would be thinking about is firstly, your body. So let's try and draw a bicep here. It's pretty good considering I do that in like 5 seconds. Your body, your brain. So let's say that this is a brain. It's a good effort. Obviously your career. So let's just do a $sign. And your social skills, right? So your ability, that is a terrible mouth, but let's just say that that's a mouth. Look at this dude. Those are the foundations really that you have to be looking at. Do you have a thriving social life or social skills? Are you in good physical shape, and are you taking care of your health? Are you doing the work to build up your emotional strength and mental resilience and self-awareness and all the things that encompass a healthy mind? And are you working towards having a successful career or a successful business and building your financial resources and having a sense of purpose? Because a lot of our purposes, not always, of course, everyone has their own unique ways of defining their sense of purpose, but a lot of men's sense of purpose is derived from the input that they feel that they're putting into the world through their work. So think about these as like the 4 pillars of a healthy identity, or the 4 foundations. There's much more that you can look at. And this is really where we're starting to look at how else can we develop our identity by giving it more associations and more things to attach itself to. For example, maybe you could be looking at like, say, martial arts or something like that. So you then want to try and build out as many of these connections as possible. Again, all of these 4. So the mind, the body, your family relationships, reading and learning. What else can we do? Literally anything, right? It could be creating content for all I care. All we're trying to do is we're trying to create all of these different branches that our identity is attached to, because the more diverse our identity, the more diverse the range of associations we have with our identity, and the more things that we identify with, the more rigid and sturdy our identity becomes. Because if our entire sense of well-being is based on one thing, when that one thing is taken away from us, everything crumbles. I can tell you a story a few years ago when I got really sick. I lost, I think, like 14 kilos in the span of a month or 2. I was vomiting blood, really unwell, and it was not good. In that period of time, I completely lost my physique. Now, I had built most of my identity on my physique. I was a fitness coach. I was always the guy that people came to for fitness advice. I was always in good shape. I was really strong. I was squatting 230 kilos. And so when I lost all of that in like the span of a month or two, my entire sense of self crumbled and I became incredibly depressed. At the same time, I was going through a bunch of other stuff. My family life was going to shit. Everything around me was collapsing. And as a result of all that, my business started to suffer because I was obviously not showing up at the same level. That was another part of my identity that had been shattered. So my entire identity was probably based on like my physique, the business, my family connections. And when all of those started to go to shit, I went to shit. Okay? The same thing applies when you go through a breakup. If your entire identity is built on the relationship you have with a person and that is taken away from you, you're fucked. You're literally fucked because the entire foundation that you're standing on will crumble beneath you. So you have to, one, diversify your identity and the things you are giving your energy to and that you identify with and your strengths. Secondly, you need to shift the perception that you have around the relationship. You have to become conscious of the downsides, okay? Once you're able to do that and you're able to see the balancing effect of, because I mean, everyone's balanced. Every relationship has equal good and bad. Every person has equal good and bad. Everyone's balanced. Until you're able to become aware of those in your mind, you will be plagued by lopsided perception. And that lopsided perception will create this emotional polarity within you, the infatuation that you feel towards that person. And you will really struggle to get over them, okay? So like I said, diversify your identity, shift the perception you have around the person and the relationship, and I can promise you, you'll be a hell of a lot happier for it. You'll actually be able to get over your ex and move on with your life in the most productive way possible. So if that was valuable, don't forget to subscribe. I'll leave another video here for you, and I'll see you in the next one.